In this lesson, we'll examine conditional sentences. These are sentences in which we describe some result that will follow if some condition is met. Here are some examples. If Tom arrives early, then we'll have dinner together. If you gave me $10, I would buy a lottery ticket. And if I had found your address, I would have sent you an invitation. People sometimes refer to these as if-then sentences, but as you can see, we can omit the word then and still retain the same meaning. Also, as an aside, please notice that we can take each of these conditionals and reverse the order, and the sentences still have the same meaning. Okay, so as you can see here, each conditional has a condition, which we'll call the if part, and a result, which we'll call the then part. There are three types of conditional sentences to consider: the first conditional, the second conditional, and the third conditional. Now I should mention that the first conditional has two subcategories. First, there's a very similar subcategory in which we use can or may instead of will, as in, if Wanda studies, she may ace the test. There's also a subcategory that functions as a general rule, as in, if Wanda studies, she aces the test. Sentences in this subcategory are the same as sentences using the word whenever, as in, whenever Wanda studies, she aces the test. Since these two subcategories are seldom tested, we'll leave them out of the discussion and focus solely on the three main conditionals shown here. Now, if you examine the three examples shown here, you'll see that each one has the same condition, that is, studying, and each one has the same result, that is, acing the test. So when is each conditional appropriate for a given context? Well, determining the appropriate conditional depends on the likelihood that the condition will be met. So, for example, if it's possible and likely that the condition will be met, then we'll use the first conditional. If it's possible but unlikely that the condition will be met, then we'll use the second conditional. And finally, we'll use the third conditional when it's impossible to meet the condition. These are instances when we no longer have a chance to meet the condition. So, for example, in the last sentence shown here, it's too late for Wanda to study. As you can see, it can be difficult to determine whether to use the first conditional or the second conditional. After all, how are we supposed to know the likelihood of someone or something meeting a certain condition? Fortunately, you will not be tested on this. You will, however, be tested on your ability to recognize the verb tenses required for each type of conditional. So let's examine the verb tenses required for each conditional. We'll begin with the first conditional. Here the condition, or if part, is expressed in the simple present tense, and the result, or the then part, is expressed in the simple future tense. This is the tense that uses the word will. In other words, if something happens, then something else will happen. Here are some more examples of the first conditional. If Barb sells her car, then she will buy a scooter. If you touch Neil's feet, he will cry. And Selma will scream if she watches another Vin Diesel movie. Notice the structure here. If something in present simple tense happens, then something else will happen. Okay, now on to the second conditional. In second conditional sentences, the condition is expressed in the simple past tense, and the result is expressed as a clause beginning with the word would. In other words, if something happened, then something else would happen. Here are some examples. If Barb sold her car, then she would buy a scooter. If you touched Neil's feet, he would cry. And Selma would scream if she watched another Vin Diesel movie. Notice the structure here. If something in the simple past tense happened, then something else would happen. Alright, finally, on to the third conditional. Here, the condition is expressed in the past perfect tense, and the result is expressed as a clause beginning with would have. In other words, if something had happened, then something else would have happened. Here are some examples. If Barb had sold her car, then she would have bought a scooter. If you had touched Neil's feet, he would have cried. And Selma would have screamed if she had watched another Vin Diesel movie. Notice the structure here. If something had happened, then something else would have happened. Alright, so how will all of this be tested? Well, you'll be tested on your ability to recognize the structure required to match up with a given structure. Here's an example. Which of the following best completes this sentence? Well, since the if part here, had one, is expressed in past perfect tense, this indicates a third conditional, which means the then part must be a clause beginning with would have, as in, if Glenda had won the lottery, she would have retired. All right, let's try another one. Which of these best completes the given sentence? Well, since the if part here is expressed in simple past tense, this indicates a second conditional, which means the then part must be a clause beginning with would, as in, if Joel saw the mouse, he would scream. All right, one last question. Which of these best completes the given sentence? Well, in this question, we're given the then part, and we need to find the appropriate if part. Since the then part here is expressed in simple future tense, with will, this indicates a first conditional, which means the if part must be expressed in simple present tense, as in, Jed will wash the dishes if Nora cooks dinner. Okay, so that concludes this lesson on conditional sentences. Let's summarize. In this lesson, we studied 3 types of conditional sentences, and we learned the structure of each type.